thank you, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is David Frink. Very happy to be here to talk about coaching Agile leaders and leading Agile coaches. So as Maggie mentioned, I'm a strengths-based executive and leadership coach, where I work with leaders and executives to help them be more successful, help their teams be more successful. I'm a ICF certified coach as well as Gallup certified strengths coach. And I work for Fidelity Investments, but my disclaimer is that I'm here sort of on my own, meaning my opinions are mine and mine alone and do not necessarily represent the opinions of my employer. Stick around towards the end. Once we get to Q&A, I'm going to put a survey link up there. And if you have any interest, you can share with me your email address to be entered into a chance to get a free coaching session with me and a free Gallup Strengths Finder certification or assessment rather. So if you have interest in that, just stick around and happy to have that conversation with you. As Maggie mentioned, please do put some questions into the chat and we'll address them at the end. So with that, I'll jump on in. So give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. This quote represents the reason why I put this talk together. I have worked with so many great coaches and scrum masters and change agents. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to say coach, but everyone in this call is a coach for the purposes of this conversation. But I've worked with so many great coaches, scrum masters, and change agents who are really, really effective at the team level, but can't seem to translate that into influencing leaders and executives. And I have been fortunate enough to do that in my career. And so it's an opportunity for me to share what I've learned. So what I'm sharing today is not the way to do it, but it's a way to do it. It's a way that's worked for me. So we'll jump on in. So a lot of times when we think about coaching and change agents, we can think about people, process, and product. We need to be concerned with and thinking about those. And many coaches and change agents, when we start out early in our career as coaches, our balance tends to look something like this. We're very much focused on process, and don't get hung up on the word process. It could be framework or sort of technical knowledge, subject matter expertise. We're very focused on learning the mechanics of Agile or Lean or whatever it is we're trying to do. And I would say that that is perfectly appropriate when you're at the beginning of your experience as a coach and a change agent. And when you're working with teams, especially teams that have no experience whatsoever in what you're trying to share with them, this is probably the balance that is what they need. It's very, very appropriate. However, this balance doesn't actually translate into the ability to get the attention of leaders and influence leaders. And so my approach that's evolved over time looks like this. My balance is this, is I focus on people. I focus on people first. I do focus on process, framework, and product, but it's only within the boundaries of people. And this balance is what actually has gotten me invitation to work with leaders and executives. I focus on the people and the challenges and the problem of the people first. So as we go forward, I'm going to tell some stories, some experiences through my career and my journey. And we'll see sort of what lessons can be drawn out of that. But ultimately, they break into 4 categories: connecting to their needs, seeing the system, influencing thinking, and providing unique value. So what you want and what they need are not necessarily the same. So many times when we show up as coaches and change agents, we have X-ray vision. We can see right through the organization, and we can immediately identify what the problems are and what the challenges are. And because we have that X-ray vision, we can start to treat what we're seeing in front of us like a puzzle. And we're the only one who's found that one little missing piece. And so we want so badly to take this piece and put it in because we know it'll complete the puzzle. But the problem is the things that we identify, the things that we see may not be things that the people we're coaching are capable or willing to see in that moment. And so that causes the risk that we're going to push on something that really isn't their highest priority and isn't their highest need. And we end up not having influence for that reason. So what I want, what we want, and what they need are not necessarily the same. So I was once working with an executive team, and I'd done some work with them based on The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And they had an upcoming offsite, and they gave me 90 minutes in their offsite to continue the discussion about the 5 dysfunctions. And so I said, this is a great opportunity. I reread the book. I started putting together all of this great content for them. And a few days before the session, I just happened to have a conversation with one of my mentors. And I shared, hey, I've got this 90-minute conversation, and it's 5 dysfunctions is the content. And I've got good content, but I can't quite tie it together. I don't know exactly what to focus on. And he said, well, would you be open to some feedback? I said, absolutely. He said, well, you've told me a lot about this leadership team as we've had our mentor relationship. And you mentioned that there's been a lot of change with this team and some challenges within this executive leadership team. So I have a question for you. And my question is, are they a team? Are they a team? And my reaction was, well, of course they're a team. They're an executive leadership team. But when I thought about it a little bit more, I thought, are they actually aligned to the same goal? Are they depending on each other? Or are they actually just running their functional areas and concerned mostly with their needs and interests? And it was the latter. And so they weren't actually a team. And what he said to me was, well, if they're not a team, then why are you spending energy figuring out which of the 5 dysfunctions to focus on? They're not a team yet. Maybe you need to help them do that. And so I thought it was a great piece of feedback. And it really shifted my perspective on how to approach that situation. And so rather than just going in with a lot of content, I said, let me think about how to meet them where they are and help them talk through the challenges they're seeing. So there have been a lot of change. They had a brand new leader within the past year, and they had grown by 50% within their organization in the past 3 years. And one point that my mentor raised is they're feeling uncomfortable. They've had a lot of change. And maybe the most important thing you can do for them is to help normalize their experience. It's to let them know that it's okay to feel uncomfortable and let them know that everyone feels uncomfortable. And so what I did as a warm up for the content was I said, let's go around the room and share what has changed the most about this organization from when you started to today. Because some people had been there 2 years, some people had been there 8 years, some people had been there 15 years and had spent almost their entire career within that organization. And so they went around sharing what had changed and how it had impacted them and impacted the organization. And I said, once you're done sharing, pass it to one of the other executives on the team. And when you do that, share what you most appreciate about that person. And so that's what they did. They shared what had changed and how it impacted them and how it made them a little nervous. And then they called someone out by name and shared what they appreciated about them. I ended up using the entire 90 minutes on that conversation. And it turned out to be exactly what they needed. They needed an opportunity to come together and connect and talk about the fact that they were a little uncomfortable with all the change. And so one of the lessons that I learned along this pathway is that good coaches have knowledge, but great coaches have coaches and mentors. If I hadn't met with my mentor, I would have put together some really, really good content. We would have talked about it for 90 minutes. They would have been educated, but it would have been a missed opportunity. I would have missed the opportunity to actually do what they needed and focus on their ability to come together as a team. So I will say to everyone on the call, If you don't currently have a mentor that you're working with, you should absolutely get a mentor if you want to up your game and up your ability to influence coaches, influence leaders. And as you look to get a mentor, it's actually not that hard to do. All you need to do is reach out to someone whom you respect and say, I really like your perspective on these topics, and I'd like to learn a little bit more. Could I set up some time? And they're probably going to say yes. Now, one thing that I noticed is that when I was early in my career, the type of mentors that I sought out were mentors that were going to be very nurturing, very encouraging of me as a coach and a change agent. You can do it. I believe in you. Because when I was early in my journey, I had a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome being that everyone knows more than I do, and eventually they'll all figure out that I'm faking it. Now, I still have imposter syndrome, but it's about totally different things now. It's not about that. But the mentors you have early are probably ones that are going to nurture you. But the mentors that I seek out today are people whom I respect and who I often disagree with. These are mentors that are going to challenge my thinking. Because if I spend all of my time talking to people who see the world the same way that I do and who agree with me, I'm not going to be surprised, and I'm not going to learn and grow and be challenged. So, if you want to better connect with leaders, focus on what they need, not what you want to bring them. Work very hard to meet them where they are, and understand that sometimes what you can do for them that's most important is to normalize their experience. We are change agents. We are used to change all the time. And the people we're working with are a lot of times very, very uncomfortable. And so sometimes it's just important for us to be able to say, yeah, this is challenging. This is uncomfortable. And that's very normal. And to be your best, have mentors and coaches who will challenge you. So we're not going to pause for questions here, but I am going to encourage you to, share some observations or some questions in the chat right now, and we'll loop back around at the end. All right, next story. Protecting a team from their manager. And the reason I selected this image is because many times coaches and scrum masters feel like they're the dam. They're the dam, and it's their job to protect the team from the onslaught of water, all of these negative things that are going to come their ways. But it's their job to protect the team. So in this story, this was a new Agile transformation. We just stood up a bunch of Scrum teams. And there was a development manager. So they were managing the people on the Scrum team, but the Scrum team was taking direction from the product owner. Well, this development manager had some work that they needed to get done. And so they went to the product owner and said, hey, this work's really important. Can you prioritize it, get it on the backlog, and get it done with the team? And the product owner said, well, we've just stood up these teams. We've chartered them for a specific reason. I have a specific product goal in mind. And the work that you're bringing really doesn't align to that. So I can't in good conscience prioritize that work. I'm sorry. The dev manager was frustrated and they went away. About a week later, the manager shows up at a refinement meeting for the team, advocating for this work, saying it's a priority. We really need to get it done. At that point, the Scrum Master jumps in and starts to push back and say, well, now is not the time. It's not really appropriate for you to come and advocate for this work. You need to work with the product owner. Product owner sets the priorities. And then the Scrum Master followed up with that dev manager one-on-one and really let them know this was not the way you're supposed to do it. Dev manager, again, was frustrated, went away. And about 2 weeks later, the Scrum Master was facilitating a daily Scrum. And they went through the board and talked to the people and asked the question, which is a really good question. Is there anything anybody's working on that doesn't show up on the board and we didn't talk about it? And about 4 of the developers raised their hands. And they said, yeah, well, our manager met with us and said, there's this other work that we have to do in addition to the work that the team's doing. So the question that I'll let you think about is, was this problem caused by a bad leader, or was this bad coaching? Because this is where I got pulled in, because I was managing at the time the coach that was aligned to support this scrum master. And so the coach and the scrum master bring me in, and they are really frustrated. They're like, this manager, they don't get it. They don't want to work in an agile way. They are reverting back to command and control behavior. They are undermining the product owner, and they've got a fixed mindset. And just as a side note, if you ever find yourself saying that someone has a fixed mindset, it actually is a stronger indicator that you have a fixed mindset about that person. But that's what they said. And so I got involved and started investigating. I got curious about what was going on. And the first thing I did was I went and talked to the dev manager, and I said, can you tell me a little bit about what this work and what this work is and why it's so important to you? And once I learned that, I had a little more data. And then I started talking to some other coaches who were working with different teams. And I found out, oh, there's another Scrum team over here with a totally different manager where the exact same thing happened. Started with the PO, and eventually dev manager just told the team to go do it. And then I heard of another team where the exact same thing happened. So come to find out that we've organized into these Scrum teams and put all of the engineers into the Scrum teams and said the product owner sets the priority. But nobody bothered to change the goals for the technology organization. And so each one of these dev managers still had a goal that said, we need to move off of our old system and onto our new system. And you have a quota of the number of transactions that need to move from the old system to the new system. And you're going to be measured on a monthly basis to see that that number is going down. That's what those dev managers were being incentivized to do. And by extension, that was actually the goals of those engineers too. So once we identified that this was a misalignment of goals problem, we were able to take it out of the team level, bring it back to the heads of technology, the head of product, and actually have them discuss it. And they immediately agreed, yes, this is a priority. And so now those technology goals became shared goals for the product team, and they started to be prioritized within all of the teams. And that's why I love this quote from systems thinking. Your system is perfectly designed to produce the result you are seeing. If there's one person doing something and you're frustrated with them, it's very easy to say, oh, it's just them. They don't get it. They don't like it. They're not going to buy in. They're a bad apple. But if it becomes a pattern, one more person, another person, then there's likely something else at play. The system is actually influencing what's happening here. And so in this case, this was a failure of coaching. If the Scrum Master, when they first found out about this, had responded with some curiosity, tell me a little bit about this work and why it's important, rather than reacting as though they needed to protect the team from the big bad manager, we would have discovered this problem and resolved it a lot sooner. And so this mistake in this situation comes from I believe, misunderstanding in the minds of some Scrum Masters and some coaches on what their responsibility is. A lot of times Scrum Masters feel like it's their job to protect the team. If you read the Scrum Guide, they're actually there to protect the effectiveness of the team, not the team itself, the effectiveness of the team. And I would argue the best way to do that is to help make the team succeed, and then zoom out one click and say, who are the people around the team, and help them succeed as well. So if that Scrum Master had felt like it was their job to help the manager succeed, rather than it was their job to protect the team from the manager, we would have uncovered this a lot quicker. And so one thing that became very clear to me in this scenario is that every time you pick a side, you cut your potential impact in half. And if you want to have influence with leaders, You don't want to be on the side of the team or the side of the manager or pick a side in any way or another, because we are all here on the side of the organization and its ability to deliver value. So if we pick sides, we reduce our effectiveness. So if you would like to have more influence and impact with leaders, you need to start to see the system that the teams and the leaders are operating within. Because if that's what you're looking for, you're trying to find the system and not getting too focused on individuals and behaviors. That promotes an attitude of curiosity, not an attitude of judgment. Because ultimately, it's the system, its goals, incentives, processes, limitations that really drives individual behavior. And it allows you to get at root causes and underlying patterns. And then expand that thinking to say, I'm not just here for the team, I'm here for the people around the team, including the managers. Because sometimes we can take a very adversarial approach to managers. Because if you read the Agile literature and the Scrum guide, it's like managers don't even exist. But they clearly do, and they clearly have an important role to play. So be thinking, for questions, where have you seen the system influence individual behavior? Or maybe it was, I think it's called individual attribution error, where you attribute something to a person when it's really the system. You've probably got good examples of that. So think about that, maybe put it in the chat. All right. So why would we have full-time Scrum Masters? Microsoft doesn't. So this was said by the CIO of a large transformation that we were just kicking off. So there's about 250 Scrum teams in total that were going to be part of this transformation. So the CIO said this in a room with about 300 people in it that was full of product managers, product owners, technology leaders, and other people. And most all of them were new to Agile. So the CIO stands up and said, why would we have full-time Scrum Masters? Microsoft doesn't. Think for a moment about what you would do in that situation. Well, I was in the room and I had been speaking to the group because I'd been talking about leadership mindset in an Agile environment. And I couldn't in good conscience just let that statement sit out there without kind of a counterpoint. And so it wasn't a direct response to the CIO saying this, but the next time that I had the microphone and an opportunity to stand up, I said this. I said, I want to reference what the CIO had said about, Microsoft or other companies not having Scrum Masters. I have no doubt that there are high-performing teams at that company that do not have a full-time Scrum Master. Maybe they don't have a Scrum Master at all. Maybe they've got someone who's doing it part-time a little bit. But I'm really curious about what was their journey to get there. And so one thing that helps me to understand this scenario is an analogy. So imagine you have 10 people that show up at a basketball court and they're going to play a game of pickup basketball where they divide into 2 teams of 5 people and they play the game. They don't have any coaches. There's no referees, but they're able to play an effective game together. Well, why does that work? That works because everyone on the court has played the game before. They know the rules and they are willing to play the game well and hold each other accountable for playing the game well. That's why it works. Now, let's take 10 people who've never played basketball before and they've never even seen a basketball game before. Put them on the court, say divide into 2 teams and play basketball. There's a 0% chance that the result of what you see you could call basketball. That's because when we're at the beginning, we need a guide, we need a coach, we need someone who knows the rules, who can help us learn. So if the goal is highly effective teams, then I think it's worth discussing what's going to help us get there the fastest. Would full-time Scrum Masters help us get there the fastest or not? So there were a couple of things that I did there. Years ago, I took a course in negotiation. And one of the things that I learned is never debate positions until you have first aligned on shared interests. So the CIO's position was, we don't need Scrum Masters. My position was, oh, yes, you absolutely do. And if that's the conversation we'd had, we would not have made any progress. We would have gone back and forth. I don't want them. Yes, you need them. Not valuable. So what I did was I reframed the conversation to be around effective teams. We all agree that the goal here is to create effective and high-performing teams. Yes, we're all in alignment. Now let's have a healthy debate about the best way to make that happen. Because had I stood up and said, no, you do absolutely need full-time Scrum Masters. Well, turns out that the CIO was actually saying, I don't think we have budget to hire 250 more people right now. That's what they were saying. And so me standing up and saying, you absolutely need Scrum Masters, like they would probably say, okay, great. How many millions of dollars are you going to contribute to solving this problem? So aligning on that shared interest allows you to start to have productive conversation, productive debate. So the second thing that I did was I used analogy. And using analogies to explain a concept to someone, it's kind of like, you ever watch like Netflix and you find you can't quite understand the dialogue, even though the volume's pretty loud, and you have to turn on the subtitles? That's what using analogy can do. It provides a second or third way for somebody to understand what's going on. And to get a little meta, that's an example of using analogy to explain why analogy is important. But analogies are incredibly helpful when you're working with leaders or anyone who may have less knowledge and expertise than you do about the topic at hand. And so it's a great way to explain something new. In that room, nobody had any Agile experience. Nobody even knew what a Scrum Master was. But I helped them to understand why it was important by giving a brief analogy. And so when I use analogies, really common areas that I use, source material. Sports is a great one. Sports is a great one for analogy because it's a common experience that a lot of people have experience with. Cars or travel, another shared experience. And then restaurants, because almost everyone has the experience of going to a restaurant. Restaurants are a fantastic way to explain concepts like flow, value streams, cost of delay, WIP limits, and pull systems. Quick example. You ever go to a restaurant, sit-down restaurant, you walk up to the person at the front and you say, we'd like a table for two, and they say, it'll be 30 minutes. And then you look behind them and you see all these empty tables and you start to get frustrated, right? That's because they're operating on a pull system. They're not going to pull you into the next stage and seat you at the table until they have the capacity to serve you. And the limiting factor isn't the tables. It's the wait staff in the kitchen. You can also do lots of things. I recently, with a team, did this. Not sure if it's the best example, but we were debating Scrum versus Kanban for a team. And so I said, well, think of a Scrum team like a catering company, and think of a Kanban team like a fast food restaurant. They both produce food, they both have customers, but the way they evaluate success and the things that are important to them may be a little bit different. And so that was a way to explore that with them. But I highly recommend leaning into analogies and be thinking about analogies you've used. Maybe put that in the chat. It was also, I think, a good example of disagreeing without being disagreeable. Because one thing that I learned, thankfully early on, is the goal of any coaching conversation is to get the invitation for the next conversation. Now, of course, that isn't the only goal. Obviously, you're really trying to help them, but you also need to continue the dialogue. So sometimes coaches can lose sight of the fact that anytime you're having a conversation, you're actually having two conversations. You're having a conversation about the topic at hand, what's up for debate, what the discussion point is. You're also having a conversation that is the maintenance of your relationship with the other person. And remember one of my early slides where I showed that big process and framework bubble, and people are just so focused on that? I've seen so many people who are highly successful at the team level who are just experts in that. They go into a conversation with a leader and they're only thinking about conversation number one, the topic at hand. And their goal is to prove that they're right and win the conversation. And they do it. They prove that they're right at the expense of the relationship. And they become the rightest person who is no longer invited to be in the room. And so it's always so important to maintain that relationship. So if you want to influence the thinking of leaders, focus on the shared interests, then lead into the debate. Use analogy, disagree without being disagreeable, and focus on maintaining that relationship and getting the next invitation. Now, I'll confess, in this example, I did not influence the mindset of the CIO, but I did influence the mindset of the 300 other people in the room. They now had some awareness of the value and importance of a Scrum Master in an organization doing Scrum where no one had any experience with it. All right, so last story, and then we'll flip it over to questions. So I was once asked to facilitate the end of year retrospective for an executive leadership team of a 15,000 person business unit. So this was all the senior executives. It's about eight, 9 people. It was a multi-day offsite, and they gave me the last 4 hours to do their retro. So I met with the sponsor, the person who invited me, and asked what they wanted. And they said, well, we need a retro. You know, what worked, what didn't work, what are we going to do differently? I said, okay, that's pretty straightforward. I can do that. And then I asked a really important question. If this were wildly successful, how would you know? And they thought about it for a moment. I said, well, you know, yeah, we need the retro, but it's also been a pretty tough year. And we've been so focused on delivery that we haven't really connected much as a team. So if you can help us connect a little bit better as a team, that would be wildly successful. That would be really good. So I came up with a plan and I reviewed it with the sponsor. They felt good about it, and we were good to go. So let's fast forward to the session. So I'm in the room with the executives of this 15,000 person business unit. And the first thing I did was I thanked them. I said, thank you for asking me to facilitate. I'm very honored. The first thing that I'm going to say is that everything here that you talk about is going to be held confidential. I'm not going to share it with anyone unless it happens to be years later at a DC Lean and Agile meetup. So I was really wise in that moment to carve out that little exclusion on confidentiality. And then I said, you've invited me to be a facilitator, and that means that I'm here to help you achieve your goals. I'm going to have to keep track of the topics we're talking about, keep you focused on what you're trying to achieve. And I may have to interrupt you. I may have to cut off a conversation because it's not relevant to the topic. And that isn't me being rude. That is simply me facilitating you to where you want to go. Do I have your permission to facilitate you this way? And they kind of looked at each other like, well, why would we have invited you if we didn't want you to do that? I said, so do I have your permission? They said, oh yeah, absolutely, of course. So we jumped right on in. So the first thing that I asked them to do, I said, I've put flip charts around the room, and each flip chart has somebody's name on it, one of the people in this room. What I'd like you to do is spend the next 20, 25 minutes with sticky notes, writing down what you appreciate about your colleagues in this room. Write down their name at the top of the sticky note and what you appreciate about who they are, what they do, the contributions they make to the team, whatever it is. And there's no limits, write as many as you want. And then go put them up on the flip charts. So they did that. And I said, okay, walk around the room, read what's been written, and then go to your flip chart. Read through in detail what your colleagues have written about you, and pick 3 sticky notes off of there that are the most important things that you needed to hear today, and bring those to the center. And so we came to the center of the room, and I had them go around sharing what was most meaningful to them. And one person said, it really mattered to today that you shared with me that you appreciate when I take a contrarian point of view when we're debating a decision, when I play devil's advocate, because I do that on purpose. And I'm not trying to be disagreeable. I'm not trying to be frustrating. I just feel like we owe it to the people who are part of our organization and our customers to really make sure we're making a good decision. But I wasn't sure if people realized that. And I always kind of worried that people thought I was being hard to work with. And so that was important for me to hear. And on it went around the room. And it was one of those moments where if you were paying really close attention, you could see people's eyes getting a little bit wet as they were walking around and sharing. And this was really important for them. It was really an important way for them to connect. And so we wrapped that up. And then we moved on to the real retro, the reason I'd been invited, the real reason I was there. And I'll get to that in a minute. But afterwards, when I got feedback on that session, appreciations is the only thing that they mentioned. That's all they mentioned. Nobody said a single thing about the rest of the retro. That's the part that mattered to them. And that appreciation retro is what got me invitation to do more facilitation with other sets of leaders. They could have done the retro thing on their own. You know, next actions, what do we need to improve upon? They can figure that out. But that conversation wasn't going to happen unless they had a facilitator. So I helped them achieve something that was uniquely valuable. All right, so we moved on to the retro. And we had a list of next actions, and I was sort of moving to the close down phase. And I said, okay, who owns this first action? We're going to put some dates on things. Who owns this one? And the president of the business unit said, that one's mine. I said, great. When's it going to be done? He said, Q4. And without even thinking, and in exactly this tone, I said, Q4. So does that mean it'll be done December 31st? And I stared at them, and they stared at me, and everybody else in the room froze like squirrels. And they're just looking from side to side, like, what's happening? What's going to go on here? And it was quiet for a minute. And then the leader said, December 14th. And we moved on. Everybody laughed. We broke the tension. And they had just demonstrated what accountability looked like, is being specific about the date. That was the reason I asked for permission at the beginning. I had no idea that that was going to happen, but they needed me to be a good facilitator for them. And in that moment, that president of the business unit was my boss's 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 boss. And I'll confess, I did spend a lot of time that weekend worrying about that interaction and if I was going to get a phone call on Monday, but it all worked out fine. And I think it's because I asked for permission. But in that moment, I was so committed to their success, I was willing to do what they needed, even if it was something that was going to make me uncomfortable. So they needed me to do that. But it was a potentially dangerous place to be challenging these leaders, but that's what they needed. Again, that's why I asked for permission. So if you want to have impact with leaders, provide them value that they cannot get on their own. And that isn't necessarily doing something for them. It's helping them to achieve something. It's all about them. It's not about what you're doing, services you're providing. It's about the success that they can have. And given a choice, always choose to deepen connections and strengthen relationships. I know sometimes I don't go in for like really touchy-feely type interactions and things like that, because I get a little uncomfortable with it. And a lot of the executives I work with, they don't tolerate that. It doesn't mean that they don't need that connection. So finding ways to do that is really important, and it's really unique, and it's something that they don't get a lot of. Because leaders, especially leaders at that level, they rarely interact with someone who doesn't want something from them. So if you, as a coach, as you're interacting with them, can show up simply committed to their success, not showing up with your own agenda of, hey, I'd like to get to know you a little bit, become your friend, and then here's all these things I need from you. They get that all the time, and they'll be very defensive. But if you can create an environment where you're just focused on them, that's really powerful, and that's a unique value for them. Every time I facilitate a group of leaders, I ask for permission at the beginning to facilitate them. I make the same silly joke about I may cut you off. That's not me being rude. I do it every single time. But you got to be committed to their success. All right, we're kind of nearing the end. We're going to flip to questions in a minute. But just to kind of loop back around, these are the ways that I have found that work for me for influencing leaders. Focus on them, connect to their needs. It's about them. See the system and help them see the system. Work on influencing their thinking. That's where analogy can be really helpful. And then work on providing unique value.